All right, we're going to pick up now with the humanistic theory of personality. Now, two of the major players in humanistic psychology are Abraham Maslow, who we've talked about before, the hierarchy of needs, and then Carl Rogers. So, Maslow and Rogers sought to offer a third force in psychology, which is this humanistic perspective. They kind of changed things because rather than study all the people with something wrong with them, which what a lot of psychologists were doing, they studied healthy people, and they looked at what makes a healthy person healthy. And this focused on this idea of humanism, focusing on conditions that support healthy personal growth. And they emphasized something called self-determination. Now, in the 1960s, some psychologists began to reject the dehumanizing ideas of behaviorism. Are we really all just conditioned? Because remember, that's what behaviorism was about. Do we really have no control over our lives? Is everything we do a matter of conditioning, of learning? And people were like, well, doesn't that take away free will? Doesn't that take away any of what makes us people? So they kind of started to reject that and they moved away from that. And then there was also this like dysfunctional view of people in the psychodynamic thought, because all the people that the psychodynamic people were studying, the patients were these, people that were highly dysfunctional. We were trying to figure out what's making them dysfunctional. So they said, well, let's talk about self-determination. Let's talk about what's right with people. Let's talk about what makes people good. So it started with Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, and in Maslow's view, people are motivated to keep moving up the hierarchy of needs, growing beyond getting just their basic needs met. Okay, we remember our pyramid, right? Physiological, safety, belonging, esteem, and at the top of this hierarchy are self-actualization, fulfilling one's potential, and this idea of self-transcendence. Well, in the ideal state, a personality includes being self-aware, self-accepting, open, ethical, spontaneous, loving, caring, focusing on a greater mission than social acceptance. So Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs was one of the things that kind of spurred this idea of the humanist movement. What makes a self-actualized person? What does someone need to do to become self-actualized? This is where Carl Rogers came in. Rogers agreed that people have natural tendencies to grow, to become healthy, to move towards self-actualization. And he said that there are three conditions that facilitate growth. Those conditions are genuineness, being honest, direct, and not using a facade. Okay, total acceptance, aka unconditional positive regard, acknowledging feelings, even problems, without passing judgment, honoring and not devaluing. Okay, so with unconditional positive regard, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to agree. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to condone, but you don't change your primary relationship with a person. You still accept them for who they are, and that they might have conditions, they might have things, feelings, decisions that are different from your own. Okay, and the last one is empathy. Tuning into the feelings of others, showing your efforts to understand, listening well. Now, this is not sympathy, okay? People just need to be heard. No. What just happened? What just happened? Where did my go? Sorry guys, totally having technical issues. Anyways, so empathy. Okay, not being, people want to be heard. They don't want to be pitied. So, and there's a difference between being sympathetic and being empathetic. Showing people that you understand, listening to people is empathy. Sympathy is kind of more being pitied. Oh, poor you. Okay, so according to Carl Rogers, these are the three things that you have to really, to facilitate the growth, to move towards self-actualization. Genuineness, total acceptance, empathy. Now, assessing the self in humanistic psychology, how do we do this? Well, one of the things that the humanistics focus on is the ideal self versus the actual self, or the real self. Okay, and they said the core of this is your self-concept, our sense of our nature and our identity, and that, one of the goals in humanistic psychology, and then again later when we could come to talk about humanistic therapy, is this idea of building a positive self-concept. Okay, and they said that people are happiest with a self-concept that matches their ideal self. So when when you have a strong self-concept that leads to a strong actual self that matches your real self. And they said that this is kind of the important thing. Thus, they really emphasized the importance of asking people to describe themselves as they are and then describe themselves as they would ideally like to be, and is there divide. According to humanists, if there's a big divide, that's a problem. This is where anxiety and other issues come in, and so the goal then would be to try to smash them, to try to bring the ideal and their real self together. Now, sometimes they use questionnaires, but most prefer open interviews. Things like, how do you see yourself? What are you like? What do you value? What are you capable of? And if the answers don't match the ideal self, self-confidence may be needed, not just self-change. Now, there's some critiques with the humanistic perspective. Is there too much self-centeredness? This is a big question. Some people say that the pursuit of self-concept and self-actualizing, accepting the ideal self and self-actualization encourages not self-transcendence, but self-indulgence and self-centeredness. Is this idea of pursuing yourself, of spending too much on yourself, is this self-centered or is this a good thing? Humanists argue that, that they don't encourage selfishness, okay, and that you should keep in mind that positive regard means acceptance, not praise. So when you're providing somebody, when a therapist is providing somebody with this unconditional positive regard, trying to bring together their real and ideal self, it's not necessarily about praising the decisions that they made. It's more about accepting the person for who they are, accepting them for the choices that they've made, and trying to teach them to learn how to make better choices in the future. All right, so we're going to wrap up here. Next time we'll be talking about traits.
Are you done now?